from where we are here. Right. So I apologize to people who are picking up this recording. We are on slide 15 going in, and we're talking about charismatic leadership. Um, I apologize. I didn't remember to start the recording, and nobody in class remembered it as well. So it wasn't me alone. All right. So coming back to what we were talking about with charisma not being a necessary attribute for leadership. And in fact, oftentimes charisma is very dangerous. Um, so um, we were talking about Jim Jones and the development of his his cult and what eventually ended up happening with him. And I was talking about the nature of his membership, and his membership was made up of a lot of educated individuals, young educated individuals, who were being displaced in society because of one thing or another. Most of it had to do with young black people or young poor people who were educated but couldn't find a space in the American dream that existed at that point in time because they were, from the wrong families, or they had the wrong color, or they had the wrong backgrounds. And that was something he was able to capitalize upon. A similar incident like this came up with the Davinian group. You all are familiar with David Koresh? No?
No, sir.
No? All right. Something for you all to go and look for. You can find them in those crime podcasts if you're interested in getting some some idea about it. But you could do some research about it. The Branch Davidian is related to the emergence of David Koresh, who saw himself as the Messiah or the prophet who was a representative of God. And when it came down to it, the the ATF and the FBI got involved with a conflict with them that was captured live on television, and it ended really badly with the building catching fire and everybody getting killed and everything. So it was another cult that kind of got out of hand, and if you now in hindsight look at what was going on and how he emerged, it was a similar thing. He had all these educated men around him and families actually, and he perceived himself or sold himself to be the prophet or sort of like the second coming, spoken about in Revelations, and he was able to lead these people into an organization that gave him permission to take control of their wives, um, have children with them, and have children with the 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 younger children. And it was kind of when you follow that story, it sounds really ridiculous, and that how can this individual end up in a position of so much influence with other people, and when you hear what he was selling and that kind of stuff, it just sounded absolutely ridiculous. But it was all based on his ability to utilize his charisma to convince people to do things, which is why when we talk about charisma being profound and unusual, it's a dangerous characteristic. I mean, it's not a bad characteristic to have if you have some degree of charisma. But obviously, it is not the charisma that's the issue. It's what the leader wants to do that becomes the issue. Because what matters is the leader's mission. I'll encourage you all to go look at the Jim Jones experience. There are lots of films about it that you can go looking for. By the way, did you all do my homework and go look at those movies? Did any of you all find them? The Black Klansman and Apocalypto?
So
What kind of book?
honestly
No,
forget.
sir.
Yeah, you forgot. Andrew, you got through them?
No, sir.
Yes? No?
No.
Nope. Okay. Well, still, you're adding up some more homework here. Find some films that go through the life of Jim Jones and look for information. YouTube has a lot of information on David Koresh and the Branch Davidians, so check that out. All right. There is not one right way to. This is another truth about leadership. Um, there are more styles of leadership, and we will be going through a lot of them. And those styles will be influenced by the person's gender, their cultural identity, their personal value systems. Those things will determine the type of leadership techniques or styles that you're utilizing. In this circumstance, we're going to look at the fact that we need to be able to utilize as leaders more than one technique of leadership to be able to get things done. So that's the thing. The importance of distinguishing between management and leadership. Now, the the myth is that you can't be a manager and a leader, and the answer to the question is strictly speaking no. Managers actually have to hold only to the objectives of the organization. They have to focus their attention on what the organization wants through the use of the resources in the company. However, managers can also exercise leadership activities as well. So you can, in fact, be both a manager and a leader. It depends upon what you're doing and when you're doing it, because this expectation about being a leader every second of every day is also a figment of an imagination. Leadership is something that takes place in what the text will talk about as periodic or episodic events. You're not in activities every second of every day when you're at work or in an organization. Sometimes you're acting as a manager and you're making managerial or administrative decisions. Other times you'll be acting from a leadership positions where you're inspiring, motivating, that type of stuff. And therefore, there's that distinguishing activities between both. The fact of the matter is that you can be both. It's up to the individual to be able to identify those moments that they are acting as a manager and those moments that they're acting as a leader. And that's a distinction that we need to pay attention. Managers are really focused on the activities of management is focused on what the organization is doing, whereas a leader may not be focused on that at all. They're just focused on the relationship that they're developing to that. And they're going to talk about that. In fact, they both overlap with each other. So, in order for you to be a good manager, you need to have both managing skills and organizing skills, and managerial skills and leadership skills. Sorry, I'm making a meal of that. They need to have managerial skills and leadership skills. So here, the leader performs managerial skills such as allocating resources, organizing systems, needs to be an effective manager and perform those functions well. It's also possible for the person to be an effective leader while being an effective manager, because as an effective leader, they'll be exercising things like motivation, they'll be dealing with empathic listening, dealing with social issues within the grouping. Those are effective leadership activities, because sometimes when you as a subordinate go to your manager or you go to your section head or your supervisor, you're not going there only for managerial or operational questions or issues. You're going to them with personal issues. Hey, I have a meeting I need to attend with my children at school. That's a leadership thing, because here the leader is going to be saying, okay, yeah, I understand. Have you been able to accomplish these things that we needed to get done? So here you're combining your managerial with your leadership, because you're listening to the person and you're saying, okay, yes, you can get to go to a meeting, but I need you to look after these things. So it's a combination, compromising and listening to people again in that. So it's a combination of those two things moving together. All right, leadership is teachable. Now, the best way to say this is that this class would not exist if leadership is not teachable. So none of this would exist if we didn't have this um, this concept, this truth about leadership. Leadership is by far a teachable skill, and it's not only based upon common sense, but there are some specifics about, and the model that we're looking at, its development requires that it's about um, evaluating yourself and constantly reflecting on what we do and learning from the mistakes we make to make better decisions in the future. All right. So the definitions of leadership that we can look for. So from a historic point of view, um, this is now we're going into the history of leadership and the emergence of leadership studies. So the term leadership or leader, sorry, can be traced in the English language to about the 1300s. The word leadership emerged in the 1800s and was only used in the context of political influence. Now, if we remember the 1300s and the 1800s, here we're talking about um, uh, coming out of the Middle Ages, coming out of the dynastic periods of monastic rule that existed in most countries over that period of time. In the 1300s, all of that period, you're looking at kings and queens and dukes and that type of stuff and caliphs and all that type of leadership was developing there. But in terms of the English language, the word leader and the word leadership didn't come up until these time frames. Formal definitions of leadership existed from only about the 1900s to coming up to about the 1929 or so. That's where we tend to have only a few formal definitions emerging. After the 1900s, we've had an explosion of leadership and leadership studies that's going on. So by the 1980s, we had 110 definitions of what leadership was, and most of them were created in the academic field. There were at least 221 definitions found in books and other scholarly publications, and at least 366 publications on leadership that do not include formal definitions. So people were talking about leadership and leadership studies, but they weren't defining what leadership was. So those are uh, a lot of work going on in a short space of time about this concept. An early definition by Mumford, and here we go back to 1906, defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control over societal phenomena. So this definition really looks at the leader as somebody who's a master of puppets kind of thing. They control people from behind the scenes, and they have this mythical or mystical influence on people to get them to do the things that they want done. Um, and a lot of leaders or definitions of leadership require, well, encompass this particular type of view of what leadership was all about. And it's quite interesting because this is one of the darker definitions of what leadership was or is considered to be. And some in some instances, we have that concept or idea still existing in our life today. Contemporary definitions describe leadership as a relational process based upon agreed mutual goals and towards some change action or activity that we're looking at. Another aspect is that there's a level of integration between or interaction between leaders and followers working together to accomplish goals. So we're going to see that we go from that overarching master of puppets definition or concept to this we are the world type of thing, all of us working together to get something useful done in society. All right. So we're going to be looking at how these definitions were arrived at, and how the various academic fields try to go about explaining leadership and therefore looking at the models we're going to be looking at. So currently, we know that there's no one correct definition of leadership, and that therefore returns us to the question of what is the purpose of leadership? In deciding the definition that fits best context that we're looking at. So the context of leadership in the job site, That's one that's going to lean heavily more on a managerial context. And therefore, the type of leadership there, or the definition of a leader in that context, will be more focused on objective accomplishing objectives, utilizing the business approaches to things. Whereas leadership in a social or community-based organization might lean more heavily upon power and influence, which is more political in nature. And of course, we have the whole issue of motivation and motivational change. So that the main takeaway from this in the modern context is that the concept of leadership and therefore its definition changes based upon the circumstances in which it's being practiced. And that at the end of the day is what is critical in terms of leading definition. So when we talk about trying to define leadership, there are different methods that they utilize. One of the first methodology is the metaphorical definition of leadership. So you have the competitive market definition, metaphor, I should say. So as with most things, for those of you who would remember, is a comparison that's not fully stated, but the idea of a comparison is to compare it to something that is known, so we kind of understand it in that light, and therefore it gives us a basic understanding of what that concept is going to be. So we have these 8 metaphors here. We have the competitive market, the administrative metaphor, the collective bargaining, democratic, consensus, anarchy, independent judiciary, and then we have the one that I have the most amount of problems pronouncing, plebis. Wow. Anybody can pronounce this? Plebiscitary.
Publicitary.
You know, right? It sounds like autocratic metaphor. All right, that's a mouthful, right? Okay, so let's just take one and try and look at the consensus that or the metaphor that they're trying to make. So if we take the consensus metaphor, in the consensus metaphor, that is leadership by consensus. That means this is the individual who is able to build relationships within an organization to and arrive at decision making through consensus. It's similar to democratic, but in consensus building, it's a little better than democratic because this is where you have people voting towards a particular choice. Competitive market metaphor is one where the strongest person arises as the leader in that organization, because the competitive market deals with the firms, and the strongest firm, which is the firm that has the biggest market share, will be the leader in that market. Now, there's one metaphor that I like out of this set, which was the metaphor of the orchestra or symphony. So, if we look at this picture, who do we see in charge here? We see the individual at the center here, the conductor, being the metaphorical leader of this group of individuals. Now, if you look at the group of individuals, we see a host of different instruments being utilized. They're all using a form of sheet music in front of them. A lot of them are not even really paying attention to him. They're looking more to the sheet music, but he's there in front of them, guiding and conducting them. So most of us might be familiar with this from films, and maybe you go to concerts and that type of stuff in Trinidad, you will come across some of this element. You see the conductor in the pan side as well. It's a very similar concept. Different pans with different tones give different voices, and therefore those blend of voices is what this conductor is trying to get out of it. Now let's make this a little smaller. Let's look at jazz musicians or just a small jazz unit. So if we have a small, anybody here is musically oriented, plays in bands and that kind of stuff, or had experience with performing? Anybody music oriented? No.
The steel bag,
Who that?
Janelle
Janelle?
Johnson. I play pan, yes.
You play pan? Very good.
Yeah.
So what pan do you work on specifically? Any particular pan, or
I
just
play tenor
any
pan,
pan you can get your
frontline.
hand on? Frontline tenor pan. Right, good. Did you
Yeah.
perform for this panorama with any bands?
Yes.
Okay, which
Maritone
one?
Steel Orchestra.
Okay. How did you all do this time around?
And I played two bands, Meritones and Ice Water. Ice Water is a single pan band, right? We came in the finals.
Uh,
Meritones didn't
right.
do so good.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
with the band's success or not, because you're able to get good arrangers in and good conductors in. Do you agree with that
Yes,
philosophy?
yes.
Yeah. Money kind of pays for the people who will come and give you the attention required. Are you a bit of a pan shark? Seen as you played with more than one band?
No, well, the two bands I played with, we come from one yard. So that's why I played with both of them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Because I know people who play in various pan and they kind of get um, what you would want to use. They get pulled into different bands based upon who can offer them the best pay
Yes,
and pay
yes.
rates and stuff like that because they're really good kind of thing. So people want them there. Well, maybe you'll find yourself in that. You gotta have a particular
No,
mindset for that too.
no, sir, I wouldn't
Eh,
be like that. That's a lot of work,
Yeah.
sir, and all through the season you
You
get
know,
no
of course.
sleep at all.
But correct, yeah. But for some of them, remember that's their life and their livelihood. So they have to get as
Yes,
much performances as possible to be able to build that purse because they don't get opportunity except during carnival, like at the forefront. All right. So the situation we're talking about here is a jazz ensemble. And in that jazz ensemble, you might have up to about 8 players or so with it. But what does the band leader need to do? The band leader has to choose the music. He has to find from that bunch of individuals out there who are musicians the right set of musicians to perform. He has to therefore pull all that information together. But in the performance itself, there are lots of other things outside of what he's doing that affects the performance. The environment, the people that are actually playing the band and band and the relationship that they develop. The need for those people to actually be able to work with each other and perform as a group. You know, get the what we call the groove going, and the absolute dependence make it sound good. Because if he's just there conducting and he's unable to manipulate and maneuver and motivate the band members to actually, sound the very best that they can sound, but not individually, but as a unit, then he's not doing his job. So this metaphor actually describes the challenge of leadership in probably one of the most definitive ways that Dupree here agrees with in terms of, and I have a bit of a thing to it because I played in bands in my life, and when you're playing, sometimes the most talented person may not be the best person to work in the band with you, uh, simply because of their attitude and their motivation to getting certain things done within the unit. So in a lot of instances, if you have what we used to refer to as mercenary players, players who are just running around for the highest dollar, then you're not going to get the very best out of them because their attention is divided between a lot of other people or other opportunities that are facing them. But if you have somebody who's kind of committed but not necessarily the biggest talented person, but they're putting in all of their effort and they're working together, there's a synchronicity that takes place within the unit to kind of get that synchronicity taking place, to get the best out of everybody in the band and collectively be the best that they can be. That's something that takes time and it's a really good metaphor for what leadership is like. There's so many different things to help to make that band or this group of individuals work effectively together to get to that thing. All right. So Dupree's leadership metaphor or jazz metaphor is probably one of the most powerful metaphors that exist here in terms of the importance of these things. It's powerful in illustrating the inclusiveness that the leader has to engender the activities, valuing the individuals, showing the importance of the public good because what they do collectively has to be acceptable to the wider audience. Because if you're only playing for yourself, that's a different issue. But you're getting a unit together for the public, and the public is the person who or the individuals who have to accept the product that you're doing. But also has to empower the people in the a hodgepodge of different skills that are required for a leader in a musical setting to be able to get the best out of everybody else. And some people have better luck at it than others, but in a lot of instances, some leadership training is something that can not only musical training because it's really people skills that you're dealing with there more than anything else. All right. All right. So Ross uses the metaphor of the leadership as an episodic effect. Now, this is what I was talking about before. When we start to look at leadership, leadership is not something that's done all the time, every minute, every second, every day. It's episodic, meaning in this context that the person is engaging in ever, not every second of every day. Welcome, Owen. All right. And that's something that we have to understand that although you might be a leader, it doesn't mean that you're going to be performing leadership activities every second of every day. So that this is another metaphoric reference that they're talking about. Leadership is a metaphoric activity. All right. Leadership is time specific, place specific, context specific. Individuals experience leadership in episodic moments. All right. There's Brandon again. Let's see what's going on. Welcome, Brandon. You okay? Seem to be having some issues there. All right, let's get back on with our episodic definition of leadership. All right, so as I said before, you're not doing it all the time. So, if you think about it, if you are in a supervisory position, not every activity that you do is related to leadership. Some of it is looking after your requirements as an operator, um, in terms of operational activities of the organization. Sometimes you'll be engaged if you're engaged in a meeting and your activity, but even in the meeting, you might just simply be reporting on information that you've received, and you're giving that information over to people in your grouping. As opposed to that, you're coming to some sort of consensus or based upon a decision that has to be made. That's a different activity altogether. That is a leadership thing. So episodic kinds of activities that we talk about. All right, so leadership, as we can see, is something that is elusive and it is a very complex activity. It's not easily definable, nor is it easy to explain, and it requires a lot of different skills from different disciplines around us. So, the multidisciplinary nature of leadership adds to contextual richness, reinforces the metaphor of the leadership as an art form. Interesting thing, the art of leadership, which is the name of one of the programs that we looked at before at the beginning. All right. So, when leadership was examined by social and behavioral scientists, it was discovered that leadership has many properties and many forms. So, again, the, the, the variations of them. So, we're going to be starting to look at the theories of leadership that emerged over the various time frames. So, here now we're going to be looking at the emergence of leadership during um, tended to be relatively simplistic in nature. Those that became more difficult to understand. Most of them, however, were relatively um, good that has taken place. But in some instances, as we will see, the theories are kind of in between. So these are the theories that we're going to look at this evening. And we're not going to look at them in great detail, but we're going to look at them in the context in which they emerged. So we have the great man theory, the traits approach, the behavioral approaches, um, situational contingency approach, sorry, influence theory, reciprocal leadership theories, and chaos theory. So we're gonna look at a few of them and how they emerge in terms of what's going on. This theory that was developed, or in terms of this, um, was before the traits approach, so in sequence. So it's one of the first ones. So it was a Darwinist theory. Great Darwinist thinking dominated the first theory in the 19th century under the assumption that leadership is based upon hereditary properties. So anybody remember let's see, Owen, are you familiar with Darwin and Darwinism?
No, sir.
Yes, sir.
No? Who's
Yes, sir.
familiar? Who's that?
Um, I
Tell
think
me
like
what.
well, I think when we did it in so is something to do with hierarchy and stuff, and
No, hierarchy and stuff like that has to do with Maslow.
Maslow.
Um,
That's my okay.
no,
Well,
that's
I'm
not
mixed
that's not
in.
Darwin.
Okay.
So
Right.
you're
So he has
referring
to
to
deal with the
Charles Darwin?
Charles Darwin, correct?
evolutionary
Yes.
biology.
Sorry, yes. Evolutionary biology. What was he known for? Theory of
Yes, so
natural
he was known for
selection.
the study of evolution and he
Right,
wrote the book of evolution.
right, and natural selection. Right, Jada? Okay. So here, this was Darwin's theory was about, and the strongest will survive. So obviously, the great man approach was really based upon that concept of Darwinism, because in terms of modern thought at that time, the concept of Darwinism was what was preeminent. Everybody was kind of following this thinking process, and therefore that helped to shape the great man approach. Great man folklore is based upon brothers of reigning, and it was believed that the intermarriage of the fittest would produce an aristocratic class superior to the lower class. So again, this had to do with natural selection and the strongest interbreed, right? We know now what happens with interbreeding. Yes? Jada? Everybody's familiar with what happens when people interbreed in species? Come on, guys.
No, sir, I don't think I am.
You're not sure?
I'm not sure.
Anybody here is familiar what happens when there's interbreeding within a family? When you marry your cousins
Yes,
and that
sir.
kind of stuff?
Yes, sir. You could
Yes,
get
sir.
the orphanage or make it
The child
Yep,
born with
you
some
get dwarf.
disabilities and stuff.
disabilities, yeah.
Correct. Yes, so it actually
Down
weakens the
syndrome.
bloodline. Correct, yes. Um, if any of you all
Yes, sir. As
ever
a matter of fact, I believe that about two of Charles Darwin's children came out deformed because of that, because he had married his cousin.
correct. Yes. He was in fact part of that whole nonsense too. But understand at the time, this is what people were thinking, right? So obviously the great man approach, which lasted for a long time, man, because here, and any of you all familiar with the Arthurian view of leadership? Um, Arthur and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and you all ever read those stories and probably looked at the films associated with them.
Yes, King Arthur and Merlin with the
Right.
sword Excalibur.
Correct, right, all of that stuff. So the idea here is that somebody would arise who's of, and then you still have a lot of films like that, right? Some special person would arise with strong abilities to unify. Even there's so many films in relation to that you could look at. But again, it was based upon people from a particular grouping in society that the leadership would emerge from. Interestingly enough, the great man theory ignored great women. So Joan of Arc, Catherine the Great, Queen Elizabeth, and stuff, they were seen as aberrations of power and in positions of authority were looked upon as of aberrations from the natural order of things. And that's something else that they talk about, the natural order of things. Um, that And even in Harry Potter, they dealt with that, the lineage issues of individuals. Um, so really dark aspects of things that people were looking at. But eventually, the great man theory gave way to the traits approach because, of course, the great man theory was very limited in its approach of trying to explain why people ended up in positions of leadership. And of course, over time, the aristocracy began to falter, and therefore, you couldn't only have leaders coming from a specific group of individuals who were inbreeding. All right. So the 1990s, the great man theory gave way to the trait theory, and in this trait theory, basically, there was supposed to be a group of or a set of whether or not this person had those characteristics.
Hi, sir.
Had a particular, yep,
You've
yes,
been
Janelle.
cutting in and out for a while.
I have.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
any better there now?
Well, I'll only know when you talk continually.
All right, any better there now? Or am I still
Yeah,
moving back and forth?
So far,
it
so
seems
good,
fine.
sir. But if it happens again, we'll tell you.
All right, please do, please do. Okay, I could be having some faltering with the internet issues here because as this time frame comes up, I come into peak usage hours in my neighborhood. All right, so what I was saying is you have these particular traits that you're looking for. It's assumed leaders had particular traits such as intelligence, height, self-confidence, differentiated them from non-leaders. All right, so what they're not talking about and what the textbooks didn't refer to is that they also had to be white, blue eyes, and they had to have blonde hair, and they had to be male. Most important. All right, those were the kind of traits that they were looking for. So you notice again the male-oriented nature of who would make up these leaders. But what eventually started to happen is that the correlation in studies between the lists that they brought together and actual leaders that emerged proved that the list didn't make sense, in essence. So research, however, failed to produce a list of traits that ensured which characteristics leaders must possess in order to be effective. So obviously, this theory by itself, just simply through observation, led to its demise. That then led to the behavioral approaches. So instead of looking at the physical characteristics of individuals, what they wanted to start to look at was the behavioral approaches that came up. So in essence, what they were talking about here is observing the various behaviors that managers in particular would exhibit and therefore determine which ones made for more effective leaders than others. All right, so what managers do on a job, which is related to the context of managerial activities, roles, functions, and responsibilities. Those were the things that they were looking at. All right, effective and ineffective leaders were compared, and the differences was trying to work out, well, who was doing the right thing, who was doing the wrong thing. So um, again, this set of studies in behavioral theory took part in the 50s and 60s. Now, let's go back in history a little bit. The great man or trait approach existed during the period of World War One into World War Two. So you had the great man approach in World War One, the movement away from great man theory into World War Two, into the traits approach, because here, remember, they were talking. And what was kind of at the backbone of some of these things was they went away from the study of Darwinism into the study of um, eugenics. Anybody here is familiar with eugenics? Need somebody with a bio background or somebody who's familiar with biology. No, nobody here is familiar with eugenics.
I know what it is.
What is it?
It's like plant breeding or something like that.
And it's
Okay, say that again,
the
Andrew.
act of
Not hearing.
it's the act of I guess you would say cleansing the bad genes from a species.
Plant breeding.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right. So we have eugenics is the study of um, the types of genetic makeup of individuals that made for the best types. The really important element of eugenics during this period was Hitler. A lot of Hitler's activities and belief structure was based upon this concept of eugenics. If you remember, his version of the the correct race was part of the philosophy that guided the activities of World War II, which then led to the concentration camps and the death camps that existed, where they were getting rid of those individuals who they believed to be the oh, what's the phrase they used? Well, sort of like the rubbish of society, which included primarily Jews, but not only Jews. People who were gay, people who were infirmed, people who were mentally challenged, people who had physical deformities, um, people who were of different ethnic backgrounds. If you weren't white, Aryan, blue-eyed, not blue-haired, um, um, of an Aryan background, then you were viewed as being inferior, and therefore you were earmarked for removal and execution. In fact, sterilization was one of the other things that they were looking at doing as well. Now, we have to think about that as the background that was sitting in terms of the philosophy that guided the trait theory. So as we came out of that eugenics, we started to look at behavioral theories. Eugenics kind of still played a role there as well, in terms of kind of defining. So the 50s and 60s, people were still playing with this idea of eugenics, um, and it helped to create the platform of which a lot of these behavioral theories emerged. So the two theories that really kind of came up really was the consideration. Well, you had the Ohio State and the University of Michigan studies. They produced two dimensions of managerial behaviors towards subordinates. So here, the two behaviors that they were looking at were consideration and initiating structure. So consideration was described as those activities that was engaged in that were friendly and support workers, whereas initiating structure was the degree to which the activities of the leader was focused on the attainment of the goals of the organization. So what they were doing was observing the behaviors of their leaders to look at how many times they did particular types of activities, and therefore they kind of do a score sheet. So consider you have somebody in your factory, because again, the 50s and 60s was also the part of the Industrial Revolution, coming out of the well, part of the industrial growth of America and the restructuring and rebuilding of Europe after World War II. You'd have these guys coming into your your organization, your factory, and you'll see these guys in white overalls with clipboards, and they're taking notes, and they're doing check boxes and that kind of stuff. So picture that in your mind as the methodology being utilized by these behavioral scientists in trying to study the behavior of managers and the types of decisions that they're making throughout the day. So the two dimensions that it spoke about, initiating and consideration, they were independent of each other, and they weren't seen as either being negative or positive. So it was just a matter of looking at how many times you did X and how many times you did Y. And that was the end all be all of it. Another approach that Blake and Morton used, they used actions that showed concern for people as opposed to concern for production. It's basically the same thing, right? So here you have a situation in which the research is, again, they're going into the factories and they're looking at the decisions and behaviors that the managers are, are taking part in. Those and checking to see how many times you do something that shows concern for people as opposed to concern for production, and that kind of therefore tells you what is the focus of the manager. So it concluded, therefore, that effective managers showed high concern for people and production. Duh. Um, so, um, did it particularly indicate what amount of activities was going on? Well, we don't know. Then we had the Michigan studies. They included three types of behaviors, as opposed to the what we call um, bivariate. This is a multivariate example. Here they were looking at task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behaviors, and participative behaviors. And they looked at people engaging in these three different types of behaviors to help to distinguish between managers who are effective and ineffective. Now, the problem with these things, of course, is they they they're trying to capture too much in a few small too much different types of activities under the banner of just a few broad um, definitions or broad consideration points. And what is show a good correlation between the results that they gathered the activity managers and the results that they were getting from it. So the majority of the results remained inconclusive and they were inconsistent, because in some places they were seeing different types of behavior, and therefore it really started to show some problems in terms of the way in which the research was being done. All right, the majority of research, as we look at here, on leadership behavior ignored the situational variables and the group processes. So that was part of the problem that the behavioral theories had to deal with. And therefore, as a result of that, coming out of that, we had situational contingency approach. So now they would start to put into place here what is the situation that what governs where all of this activity is taking place. So this one proposes that leaders should vary their approach or their behaviors based upon the context or situation, and this situation determines who will emerge as a leader, or the leader being the product of the situation. So that was where now they're putting into in which the decision making is taking place, so the leadership practices going on is what is going to be looked at now. So excuse me. All right, so how do the effects of leadership vary from one situation to the other? That's in essence what they're looking at. All right, so what eventually started to happen is that when they tried to utilize this kind of theory, they started to come up with some theories here. So you had first the least preferred code worker or the LPC model, and then you had another model. So basically, this model, let's deal with this one here as it's treated with here. It describes the situation. Um, leader traits and effectiveness. So, in essence, what they were saying was based upon trying to observe how the context in which people are operating um, the, affects the activities of a leader. So now they started to put a lot of emphasis now on the context of where leadership was taking place. And therefore, they were trying to look at how the situation impacts on the activities of the leader. The second theory that they looked at is the path goal theory. This is 1957. And in essence, here, the there are two paths that all employers or employees face. The path to personal goals, which is as with anybody, they have their own personal things that they want to do, income, a household, to have children, to have a family, that kind of stuff. And the other path would be the production of which is kind of like the company's objectives. So you had these two diversion goals or objectives or paths, and the objective of the manager or the leader in this circumstance was to make the person see the the um, the pathway to their own personal goals through the accomplishment of the production goals. So in a sense here, it's kind of like motivational theory, which means the task of the leader is to increase the personal rewards to subordinates for performances in order to make their paths to their own personal goals clearer and easier, which means this is the birthplace of motivational theory. And this is actually where um, people like this fella Maslow and the others started to come up here when they started to do needs and goals and that type of stuff. It starts to come up in the origin in this kind of area. So the problem with this though is that there was a lack of supporting data that they were able to gather in terms of looking at how these theories worked, and the loose association between circumstances and goal orientation was kind of difficult to observe. So again, the theory lacked credibility in the long run, and it was just the conclusions that they drew were just kind of kind of the thing. Now we have to remember now in the back of the 50s and 60s, what's at the background here is that industrial regrowth, factory orientation, mass production activities that's taking place, and that's the kind of background in which they were operating in. So coming out of that period, we then also had the influence theories, which really focused its attention on charisma and the impact that charisma has in the organization in the managerial context. Now, Max Weber here started his work in 1924, and you'd see it went on in 1947. He and the importance of those dates can't be stated because that's actually the beginning of the movement towards the World War II and the end of World War II. And the reason why he used those dates as part of his thing was because he was able to capture a lot of data and observing the impact of charismatic leadership during this period as well. So um, again, he came up with this circumstance to describe a form of influence based upon traditional power or formal authority, but rather on the follower's perception that the leader is endowed with exceptional qualities. Now, for this is coming out of a period that Max Weber observed that Hitler was idolized by the German society at the time, to the point that when he became chancellor for life, people celebrated it. Now, this meant that you have a democratic system of government being given an emperor, and that emperor will sit in that position of power forever, for as long as they lived, because of the influence that this individual had. and he was able to convince everybody that his concepts and ideas was for the betterment of everybody in their society. And this was the dangerous element that Max Weber was talking about. And influence theory really focused on that because he wanted to know, well, why are people giving over to this type of activity and giving over that amount of control to somebody with whom they are having this type of relationship. So this is where this charismatic leadership. And Robert House then picked up this study in the 1977 an area, and he started to look at trying to observe the some variables that they could test about it, because again, charisma is again a very um, it's not a tangible thing. It's either what gives you charisma, and actually a lot of theory has been approached with that. And one of the things that they talk about with having charisma has to do. It starts with what you look like, what you sound like, how you speak, the shape of your face. So this is one of the reasons why marketing is so important when it comes to somebody who's charismatic. You control the 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 image of the individual being projected to the wider environment, and this is something that we have to pay attention to, because a lot of political leaders and leaders generally in business and otherwise manage their presence in the society. In our current society, you recognize that. Consider, for example, some of the people that you have joined in your social media circles, and you observe what's going on with them. They generally would be people you know, or people who are doing things that you like. But start to observe some of the characteristics of what they're getting involved with, what they look like. And those are the things that we talk about with charismatic leadership. The issue is not about the individual themselves, but it is more about how you respond to that individual. And you'd start to observe what these theories we're looking at, these influence theories, because to a great extent, a lot of people find themselves being influenced by these types of people who find themselves in position of leadership because of an unseen reaction that individuals are having towards the person. All right. So charismatic leadership comes back in here. So it was very concerning. All right. And some of the things that they talked about here, for example, is that charismatic leadership includes rulers in crisis,
So
and when followers are
excuse you.
willing to challenge a state. Yes, breaking up again.
So you're breaking up plenty again, yes.
Uh, is it settling down yet? Let me just check my settings here.
Hearing you better, sir.
Swap over here. Try that thing here and see if it helps. You might lose me for a second while I was switching over networks for a minute. All right, any difference there, guys? Hello?
Yes, sir, I'm
Yes,
hearing
sir,
you
we
good.
hear.
All right, okay. Okay, so we were talking about the influence theories that involve with charismatic leadership, and what we find happening, or what the theories begin to look at and observe, was that charismatic leaders became was a lot of revolutionary thinking. So again, if you think about cities in the United States in particular and Great Britain, you'd recognize that a lot of change was taking place. So you had the 60s in which you had the civil rights movements in the United States, but you also had similar movements in other parts of significant metropolitan areas in the world. And leadership would arise inside those circumstances. Um, Charismatic leadership found its way in there, or charisma was became a factor because people were willing to follow people who were exhibiting the types of change they wanted to get involved with. So, with the Black Lives Matters, for example, during the pandemic, you notice that a lot of individuals rose to the forefront and they gathered a lot of followership based on the status quo of the society. This is where the whole concept of defund the police and all that kind of stuff in the United States comes up with. Generally, there's this Black Lives Matters movement, and was there anybody of particular charismatic leadership that rose to the front there? A number of people may have areas of power, but were they willing to capitalize on it? That was another issue.
So you're
And this
breaking up
again
again.
comes back to wow. Yeah. All right, I'm ready. All right, is it settling in back now? No.
Yes, so it going and coming, but we didn't hear what you say this one.
Can exhibit or show us this kind of charismatic effect and influence as a kind of recompense. But you realize that nobody really stood out in those movements. People's lives were less open to scrutiny, whereas in our current life scenario, a lot of people can't maintain privacy, in which they can manage the image that they project to the society outside there to be able to control those activities. That's something that we want to probably pay attention to as well. But the idea again is that the influence theories came to the conclusion that charismatic leadership or influence theory indicated that the willingness for people to change and give people that sort of influential power was really associated with the context in which that leadership opportunities arose. So here they were referring to not only people like Hitler, but also people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and other individuals whose charismatic nature led to some massive changes during that particular time, because people agreed with the change that they were trying to make. So you'd see the emergence of those types of things coming up from there. And again, the main takeaway here is that the leadership is less important to the relationship or the perceived relationship with the followers. Here by Yukel is real important. Too much deference to individual leaders by followers can create a dangerous scenario where leaders misuse their power or deliver a vision with an empty dream. Now, this is the case, for example, with people like David Koresh, the Reverend Jim Jones, the Moonies. There were a lot of charismatic people who were able to capture the attention and the adoration of a lot of people around them and lead them into some really horrific decisions and behaviors that we can see the world around, and not just only in the United States, but also in Japan. We had another set of cult followers and that type of stuff. So, especially when we started approach things like the Millennium Change, that was a whole host of suicide people that was involved with that nonsense, and there was a lot of that type of activity that was taking place. And again, it positioned itself around a charismatic leader. So again, the warnings that they're giving out here is that we need to be careful with charismatic individuals, um, and pay attention to what their objectives are rather than the emotional response to the individual that you have. That is really important for us to logically think about. All right, so by the 1970s, or the emergence, we had the emergence of the reciprocal leadership theories, and this focused on looking at the relationship between leaders and followers. So, what was happening in the 1970s? Anybody? We talked a little bit about it. What was happening on a global state and a global thing in the 1970s?
The Vietnam War.
Right? So, what else? The war wasn't the only thing. Anybody knows about the flower power movement? Never heard about that?
Yes, sir.
All right, right. Okay, so it had a lot to do with music too, or I should say there was a lot of music involved with it. So in the 1970s, there was this movement towards change, um, this distrust of status quo and distrust of leadership was one of the issues that came up during that period. You had the anti-war movement, you had a lot of criticism, you had a lot of movement towards being more natural in our lives. Part of the things that came on here was adult suffrage was something that became important. Women's suffrage movement became well, even from the 60s into the 70s, it became even more critical. Um, you had the emergence of birth control was also an important thing in the 1970s as well, because that led to the free love movement and the flower power type of thing. So we have to think about the context now in which these theories are coming up because they influence on the ideas that they have here. So one of the things, so here we're talking about groupthink. So here the focus is not only on the leader but on the leader and followers, and it elevates the importance of the followership in the leadership process because you can't do anything without followers. So Eastern thought started to become apparent in this kind of thing. So a lot of people, musicians and other popular leaders, started to go visit India and Japan and bring back Eastern cultural ideas about leadership and how you do things together in a more communal basis. And those things begin to infiltrate the thinking processes of individuals here. So again, those concepts and ideas actually started to influence the thinking process and the theory development here. So the theories posit that leadership is not just something that a leader does to followers, rather, leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contribution of the participants, shares power and authority, between leaders and participants, and establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. So this is the context in which the leadership theory started to develop during this period, and it started to bring this whole togetherness idea, and we are all collectively one. That movement of concept that people are talking about here. So um, it therefore started to cause that increase in the concept idea that the leadership was not all important. Again, think about the background this is coming from. This is during a period where status quo and older leaders in politics especially were being looked upon as being very suspicious, and their motivations were very narrow-minded, whereas the newer concept or the younger people coming up in the society were saying, no, 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 we have to have some say in what is going on, and therefore the theories that emerged during this period started to look at leadership as one that the leader involves the other people, the followership in their decision making and the activities that they get involved with. So, all right, so the leadership process encompasses the central role of all people, including the participants. This is something that was featured in them. So some of the main theories that emerged during that period were the transforming leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. Now, the servant leadership and the followership theory, those are the ones that you guys will actually be doing some further work on that when you're doing your chapters. And you're going to see that coming up in a little bit. So the transforming leadership theory really is about, this is, as you said, formulated by James McGregor Burns in 1978, a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. So again, we have to think about the letdown of the 70s and 60s in terms of Vietnam and the well, in Europe, you also in England you had the IRA and that type of stuff, where people felt as if um, the leadership around them weren't holding themselves to high values, and therefore it felt that in transforming leadership theory, that we had to be able to hold each other up to that level or standard of activity, and therefore it results in a situation where both the leaders and the followership will kind of like be checks and balances for each other. So leaders would try to appeal to the followers' higher ideals and moral values such as liberty, justice, and equality, peace, and humanitarianism, not to the lesser emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, or hatred. Now, it's interesting because this type of thinking in terms of trying to get people to get together for the good of mankind, for lofty ideals and lofty ideas, is something that I find today is kind of not happening. People are getting together because they're afraid of other people, or they don't like other people, and therefore they're following this particular leader because they don't want the other leader. And that type of negativity is what kind of works straight through the entire organization and the activities. So interestingly enough, we kind of see a reversal from the 70s to now, to that type of leadership by fear as opposed to leadership through higher ideals. So it's really interesting that kind of make that kind of turn around that. But again, what had to do with that you have to also remember the 50s and 60s. There was this Red Scare in the United States. So anybody who was thinking socialism and communism was seen as evil, and that kind of still pervades the United States environment. We have a lot of people in the older generations around us here who look at socialism as something negative, um, and don't agree with communism and that type of stuff. And we still have this inherent negativity attached to those concepts. During this period in the 1970s, with this transformal transformational leadership theory, um, you had the emergence of commune living, and some charismatic individuals got themselves attached to that because this is where Jim Jones and others came up and kind of hijacked some of this activity, pretending to have higher ideals when in reality they were leading dual lives and that type of stuff. So, so this theory is based upon the inseparable nature of the relationship between leadership and followers. And therefore, there was this symbiotic relationship that had to exist between the both in order for you to achieve the objectives. And the objectives had to be mutual in nature. We all wanted that particular purpose. We all wanted that goal to be objective, to be things. So the ethics part of it becomes very powerful here, and this is one of the the in, sort of like the unending impact of this type of thinking. Ethical values started to become very important. The moral, as I say here, unique aspect of transformational leadership theory is its moral component. That was not something that was seen as being important before, but because of what took place during the period historically, this is something that was becoming more and more critical because prior incarnations of leaders was exploitive in nature, and in a lot of instances they would use their power to manipulate other people to get things done their way. Now let's move to, so these are some of the transforming leaders that I found, and most of these individuals we've discussed before, with the exception of John F. Kennedy. Um, was the only person, because we also spoke about Mother Teresa as well, and Lincoln. These were all people who led their country through, or their people, the organizations. In some instances, countries. In other instances, it was parts of populations throughout the world into making transformation, making major change. So these were the individuals who I encompassed by that. So transformational leadership is contrasted to transactional leadership, um, because the transactional leadership is one which is where you utilize some form of reward structure to get people to engage in some sort of activity. So one person takes the initiative in making contact with others for the purpose of an exchange of something of value. So this actually started to bring us into the concepts of motivational theory. So Burns is speaking about this transaction leadership because one of the ways in which you motivate people to do things is by providing some form of stimulus in the form of a transaction. For those of you who might be familiar with this, this is the carrot or stick approach to leadership. So you either you dangle in front of the horse or donkey, as the case might be, depending upon what picture you're trying to do, a carrot to keep the animal moving forward. And at some point in time, you have to give the animal a bite of the carrot, or else eventually they're going to stop following the carrot. So that's the type of motivational thinking that goes on. So that once you have this goal or these rewards that you offer to individuals in the organization as followers, the leader can get things done. This is the transactional nature of the leadership program that they looked at there. All right. The theory is also informed that you can use both transformational and transactional. Um, Again, because of the methodology, and again we spoke about this, is that the recognition that there's more than one way to get things done, um, in terms of what's going on here. So the problem with this theory, however, is that it lacked a lot of clarity and specifics. So to really tell you exactly how to get these things done, what to do, how to do it, it was kind of difficult. In fact, the theories overall lack the clarity and specificity required to make it more usable in society. Now, the servant leadership theory, which still falls up in this area as well, that theory begins with viewing that the leader is a servant first to the people whom they lead. And this was sort of a novel approach to things. So the servant leader is important because they are there for the function of lifting everybody else up. So on the primary needs of others. So the servant, through focusing on the primary needs of others and the organization, then transforms himself or herself into the leader. So this is the servant leadership approach. And again, you all are going to be dealing with this in a little more detail than I will be able to do here, because I have to kind of go through all the others as well. So this servant leadership, I think one of our politicians here attempted the servant leadership approach. Um, it failed because a lot of our political leaders do not see themselves as servant leaders. They just see themselves as traditional leaders, because what the servant leadership is designed to do was to empower other people to be able to achieve the goals of the organization, and of course across the board, utilizing multiple techniques and situations. But at the end of the day, the servant leader was supposed to prepare for handing over to another person the leadership values. Um, Again, the theory, this theory, much like the other one, lacked the focus, lacked the clarity and specifics required for it to really kind of pull together. But it's still an important departure, because the change now is that what is more important here is not the leader, but the follower becomes the focal point of the theory, the behavioral theory. All right, and some rain here finally. All right, so transformational. All right, so we talked about this already in terms of transactional, and the fact that we can use both of them in terms of making changes. So these are, again, pictures of transformational leaders. Did I just do this? Seem to have some repetition of some slides here. All right, so yes, I think I went through all this already. Oh, wait, am I going backwards? Yes, I am going the wrong way. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so servant leadership, right? So, right, there we go. Leadership. All right. Both leaders and participants are stewards of the organization. So this is the important thing here. The servant leadership is that everybody is working towards the goals of the organization, but the leader's function is to empower the other members of the group to be able to achieve those goals, so that at the end of the day, what you find happening is that all of the people engaged in the activities are themselves better off or better prepared. And in fact, one of those individuals, or numerous of those individuals, are able to take over the role of the leader in his or her absence. So in essence, you become stewards of the the people around you, and you're creating a situation in which you are going to move these people forward in terms of their ability. So it's about empowering other people. All right. So again, problems with this theory is the whole, it lacks clarity, and it doesn't really give us the kind of blow by blow type of breakdown that we required for it. Followership theories. These are another set of theories that emerged again, coming out in the thing where the focus now is not on the leader, but on the nature of the relationship you have with followers. You'd see the 1990s here coming up with that. All right. So it rejects this industrial approach that existed in the 70s and 80s, in terms of most models kind of focused on looking at the workplace as an industry, sort of like a classroom setup, um, in which it positioned leadership in a superior role to the followers. But therefore, in this case here, it kind of flips the script, where the leaders are less important than the followers, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. In any organization, the important persons to take part in the activities of the organizations are the followers, not the leaders. Hi, Mahindra. Welcome back. All right. Let me mute him off there. All right. So the right. So the leadership is not as important as the followership, and that's what the followership theory models go about. And we talked about this already in the previous session, where we talked about the nature of independent thinking versus activity, and the types of followers that you have in terms of this theory, the alienated followers, sheep, yes, people, and that kind of stuff. So they kind of outline the kind of followers you're going to have, and as a leader, your job is to empower these persons to become effective followers. All right, from the alienated follower to the sheep to the yes person to the survivors to the effective followers. Effective followers share these qualities. They manage themselves well. They're committed to the organization. to a purpose, principle, or persons outside of themselves. So again, they build their competencies and focus their efforts for maximum impact, and they are courageous, strong, and credible. So these are some of the features of the followers. So the focus on the theory here is about the follower, not about the leader. And the focus is on the responsibility of the leadership to help to generate that motivate those people to take part and empower them and give them the tools to be able to do so. So most of this theory is about that reciprocal nature. So let's go to the next issue that comes up, which is leadership theories in the 20th century using the industrial paradigm. So again, we have to remember, coming out of World War II into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the focus of a lot of the leadership studies had to do with looking at the output of firms and the production of goods and services, because that was critical. The vast majority of theories, if we go back to the behavioral and the influential, focuses attention on factories and factory operations, which is the industrial paradigm that we were looking at before. In the 70s, we began to drift away from that because of the distrust in the the systems that existed there. And therefore, we started to get this movement away from it into a more um, one love type of approach to things. We are all together kind of approach to things. So you have that movement taking place in the background of where these leadership theories are emerging. Now, the problem that comes up here is that the theories still coming up in the early and latter part of the 20th century was still having a tendency to be structurally oriented. So if we look at this quotation here, the the leadership theories in the 20th century mirrored the industrial era in that theories were structural, functionalist, management oriented, personalistic in focusing only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self interested and individualistic in outlook, male oriented, utilitarian and materialistic and ethical perspective, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific in language and methodology. Now, if any of you all ever got the opportunity to go back and read some of those, look for a textbook on some of those older techniques like situational contingency theory or um, trait theory, and not so much trait theory, but some of the other theories there. The amount of mathematics that was utilized to try and break this thing on bivariate analysis and a whole pile of statistical approaches of data collection and correlation activities. Again, it showed you the nature of where the theories were sitting and how they positioned themselves in trying to explain the best way for you to become a leader, as opposed to the newer theories now that are softer in approach, concerned more with the relationship between individuals and their organization, and plays down or looks away from the male-oriented nature and focuses heavily on the ethical aspects of the leadership. Those are things, the historical approaches to leadership that still impinges upon the way in which leadership currently is looked upon. If you look at some of your managers and teachers, their behavior kind of throws back to this type of activity that you're looking at. I remember one time I actually attempted an activity early in my teaching career where I took a class, and instead of using the traditional seating approach where we were sitting like we were in a factory floor and everybody's in a desk facing the front, I took all of the desks and chairs and created a horseshoe in which you could, in the classroom, and the room was big enough because I had about 30 students in that class. And we created this big square round table, so to speak. So the the teacher joined one of the arms of the square, basically, or horseshoe technique, and you were able to see each student independently. Now, the advantage of that is that no student can hide, and you can see everybody at any point in time once you were looking in their direction. It allowed for direct face-to-face contact and eye contact with every student in the classroom without the possibility of them hiding behind each other, which is a technique that we see happening in a lot of classes. If you remember the normal face-to-face class, this is even worse because now we can't see each other at all. Um, but the idea here is that when I did that, I made that attempt. I remember a lot of the other older teachers had a serious problem with the way the class was set up because it challenged the methodologies that they created in teaching their own classes. Now, some lecturers didn't care. They found it was really nice. In fact, what they did, they opened the horseshoe up because most of them didn't teach sitting down. They taught walking around. We use something called management by wandering. All right, so you walk around the class and you manage the class by moving among the students and observing what's taking place. Um, and that worked well for those who stood and taught, but those who sat and taught preferred to be up on the dais or up on the rostrum, as we like to say, and not down on the floor with the students. And that it challenged them to come down and sit on the horseshoe or sit on that octagon or that square because it meant they had to physically level themselves with the students. And I remember getting buffed in classrooms in staff meetings for doing that in the classroom. And I know I took a lot of crap for that. And that's because, again, the concepts of teaching practice and leadership theory were all based upon this concept of setting up your classroom like you're in a factory floor. If you go into a lot of business places, you see the same classroom setup up there. And if you go, everybody has a little cubicle where they're hiding out, and they're all in a line going left and right or up and down in rows and columns. It's sort of like, to be able to manage what's happening in the workplace is very similar to how you go about managing what takes place in the classroom. So you find a correlation between that industrial thinking, and I found in Trinidad we have maintained the industrial approach to education, much to the older theories, and less tolerant of breaking away from that approach into a more modernistic approach to leadership. So this emergence of transforming away from those industrial paradigms into the newer paradigms that exist around us is going to be a problem. In fact, we're going to have to look at developing methodologies. In fact, the theories here starts to reflect that the theories themselves have to start to approach a significant change in the way the world works, and leadership has to be able to operate in a very dynamic situation. All right. So in 2004, we have these people looking at, let's look at the quotation here, faced with unprecedented economic, technological, socio-political, and moral and ethical tumultuous sea of change, there is a need for new theories, new application, and just plain new thinking about leadership. So here we're thinking about the context again. What is the context in which the theory development is taking place to try and explain leadership in the world around us? And the concept that we're looking at here is very simple. We are in a time frame in which change is rapid and extremely fast. The world is not such a large place anymore. Technology brings us closer together quicker and much easier than it used to before. That leads us into a situation where the influence of change in one part of the world brings about change in another part of the world extremely quickly. We are affected by people and their decisions in one part of the world very quickly over time, and it doesn't take a long time. So, for example, consider what took place during the pandemic. Um, a change that was taking place in a world away from us in China came to our doorsteps within the matter of months, and that kind of brings to mind the whole situation, need for us to be able to react quickly to making these kind of changes, or else we're going to be stuck. And we have to find those methodologies. Now, much of what is taught in school has prepared us to live a life in a very controlled world. For those of you who have any form of OCD, for example, you might find yourselves having a lot of problems dealing with the world around you because it's not that controlled environment that you find yourself in. Um, the reality is that the world is messy, life is messy, and we have to find a way to operate within it. The theories that existed assume, however, that the world is an orderly place, and therefore they fall short of describing the reality that we live in. So the situation that we have is one of, I would, the word I like to use is controlled chaos, because the world is just coming at you. People are making changes, things are happening, and in a lot of instances, we have no bearing or have no control of what's happening. And we have to learn to operate in it, which is why people who have control issues, which like OCD and such like that, try to manipulate or manage the space in which they operate in to be comfortable. But the theories that exist to explain leadership in that context cannot be so close minded. They have to recognize that the world is changing around them, and therefore they have to be able to adapt to that change. Now, that then brings us into this whole situation of chaos and chaos systems. So, um, chaos theory is what has emerged out of this. And interestingly enough, um, there are chaos theories that exist out there. Chaos has been defined as order without predictability. It's interesting because the situation is that there is order, but it's not easily seen or predicted. That's a curious thing because um, if you spend enough time observing what is taking place, there's a pattern. But when it happens, we don't see the pattern. All right? And that's something that's interesting. So chaotic behavior has two important characteristics. It is inherently unpredictable, while at another level, it displays a hidden pattern. And that's what these theorists are talking about. So that therefore chaos theory tries to approach the world from looking at it in this kind of ever-changing environment and trying to find a way in which we can work sensibly in that context, right? So there's some things that they talk about. The chaotic world, the chaos world is a quantum world, a world of wholes, not parts. It is a connected world in which relationships are everything, and that's important for us to be realistic. It's a world filled with strange attractors of meaning and force fields that help shape the behavior of individuals and organizations. So, again, we have to remember they're describing the world of chaos around us and the systems that have to be developed to be able to deal with this. Um, the, the final word about the chaos thing is the most important thing we have to take up out of this is that we cannot control what's happening. There's nobody, no country, no world, no part of the world that can actually take control of a lot of these environmental things that are taking place around. It's like trying to stop the wind kind of thing. You can't. You have to find a solution to a problem, but that solution can't be a one and done. You have to use different techniques as we're going to talk about. So some basic concepts that we utilize for working within the chaos world. Sensitivity to the initial conditions. So the concept here is what happened at the start. Initial conditions. It implies how something begins greatly determines where it's going to end. So we have to be We have to pay attention to the initial occurrence, the initial happenings, so that it will signal to us the possibility of where we're likely to go. All right? Relationships and connections are critical. None of us exist independently, and our relationships with others, independent of our relationships with others. And this is important. So we have to pay attention to the initial changing factors. We also have to pay attention to our relationships and our connections, because those are the things that we're going to utilize to work our way through what's going on. Another way to realize the importance of this is to consider the concept of andness, because that again, it's the way in which we're going to survive the chaos that's approaching us, the changes that are approaching us. Andness. If you think about it, something goes wrong in your life, something critical. What happens? How do you get through it? By yourself? No. You get through it by reaching out to other people close to you with whom you are maintaining a good relationship, and again, good relationship, or and you are they are helping you make sense of the situation that you find yourself in, and they are collectively, you all are all collectively finding a solution to the problem. Now, how we go about finding that solution is where problems come up, because that's the something that you have to work with, or someone you have to work with, right? So when you make those connections, you're literally anding with it, or anding with them. Unless you and somebody or something, then nothing else can happen. All right, so this is the concept that they're talking about here. If you can successfully and with somebody, which is the anding thing we're talking about here, um, all right, so the idea is that um, so it's we have all right, so wow, this is some stuff here that we need to talk about, that the theory is trying to bring to you. Systematic leadership is both and sorry, both and, not either or. So a lot of us have this right or wrong concept in life, um, black or white. Let's look at it from that point of view. This theory is telling us we need to stop that. We need to say what is right about this and both wrong about this, because there's some elements that are right and there's some elements that are wrong, and there's some elements that from something else that comes out that are right and wrong, that if we bring together a combination of the two, we might be able to find a solution. This is why we can't be using the phrase it's either we do this or that, or you're either black or white. Shades of gray, guys. Shades of gray. We have to be able to be flexible enough to understand that the solution to a problem is not going to be cut and dry, and it's not necessarily going to be from one position or one perspective only. Multiple perspectives will be required to be able to get to a solution for the problem. Um, and that is the world we're living in, and it makes for a very interesting set of things that we're looking at. So we talk about that anding, all right, and we also have to look at the other elements of that relationship, that solutions will come up that aren't going to be, again, from one point of view. So you have to look at it from the position of multiple responses to a problem come up, and from each one of those responses there's something right or something wrong. So you put together several right parts of a solution and then come up with something that will work, at least for that particular time. So because of the complex nature of these problems, partial solutions may be all you can be expected to develop. But you'll be surprised at how much several partial solutions can accomplish. Now, this is like, all right, so let's take one of the the overall situations that we face in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to deal. Let's look at crime. Partial solutions, because the problem that we face is a very complicated problem. It's not a simple issue. It's not a simple problem. We have different elements of criminal activities taking place in a wide variety of environments. But we're trying to utilize one set of tools to accomplish a solution. The problem with that is that everybody comes with one particular, if you do this, it'll get things right, and yada, yada, yada. But the whole point about it is that nobody actually has a correct solution, but we have bits and pieces that will come from one person to another person and so on. And once we pull all of them together, maybe we might find some overall solution. Again, it's because we have a tendency to look at a problem from very simplistic approaches. The criminal situation or the crime situation we face in Trinidad and Tobago is not something that was born overnight. So there's a historical aspect to the development of criminal activity. Secondly, it is about people. So it's a psychological and social issue that's facing us. So we have to approach that with some sort of psychology and sociology attached to it. There are organizational issues that are going on with that. So again, we need to approach those aspects of the problem from an organizational standpoint. There's a there's a host of different perceptions we can throw at looking at that problem. And each one of those perceptions requires or things requires a particular approach to correcting or treating with the issue that's coming up there. Anybody who comes to you and says that they have a solution to the criminal problem in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's real simple and straightforward, just shoot everybody, and you're obviously not taking into consideration all the aspects of the problem that you're facing, and you're not treating with it. You're trying to use old school methodology, more like an industrial military approach to a problem that has gone way beyond what you're currently capable of dealing with, and that is really interesting because in this, believe it or not, the chaotic world or even the criminal world is self-organizing. It means it finds its own balance, and it means the chaos around us has its own patterns of trying to get things done. Now, the problem with chaos theory is that it's a vague sounding theory. How do we actually teach you to do that? How do we shape our behaviors to deal with that? That's a different question. All right. And in fact, a lot of us will not have. Um, I mean, I know I have OCD. I like things in a particular way, in particular order. When the world throws confusion towards you, it takes a while for me to react to it because I've become really, as I've become older, I've become more fixed in how I like things. And all of you are in the process of firming up your treatment of the world around you, the way you like your food cooked, the way you like your beds made, the way you like your hair combed. Those are methods or activities that help to define us as who we think we are, our perception of self. And as we become more fixed in how we feel about things, it becomes more difficult for us to deal with the change that is approaching us, that is there, but we may be blinding ourselves to it. So that's primarily one of the things that we have to look at. Try not to underestimate the influence that other people have on you, and in the wider scheme of things in leadership, that people have in an organization, even if they're not main players in your life or leadership. You have to look at how other people impact upon each other, because from those individuals you're likely to find organizational solutions, um, especially in the thing again, vagueness in terms of how to treat with these things. All right, now authentic leadership. This is one of the more recent leadership models that has come up, and this one comes up from a very the observation that leadership has lost its authentic nature, and that a lot of people have lost confidence in the behaviors of leaders throughout time. We've seen far too often that leaders say one thing and do something else. And authentic leadership is a model that is it tries to get us to look at right, tries to get us to look at leadership from the perspective of being very um, true to our ethical values, and that is a really important thing because if any of you all have paid attention to leadership around you, even in Trinidad and Tobago, you would find that there's a big disconnect between what people say and what people actually do. I don't know if you would agree with that. Um, any of you would have had that experience. Um, the behaviors of of um, of leaders in our environments have far too often um, seem lackluster. They don't uh, they don't exhibit the kind of um, ethical values that we'd like them to, and it creates a lot of problems for us in things. So this is how Lutherans and Ovello describe authentic leadership. It's is leadership as sorry authentic leadership as a confluence of positive psychology, transformational leadership, and moral, ethical leadership. And the authentic leader as somebody who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral or ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. Now, if we look at this list of um, of traits that this leader has to have, can can we really find somebody with all of these things? Take a moment to look at that list of variables. Confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be good leaders. That's a lot of stuff. Maybe we might get some. So one of the main criticisms of authentic leadership is that it's very what's the word I'm going to use? It's kind of like too good to be true kind of thing. It's like pie in the sky, um, which like any good theory describes an ideal for which we want to achieve. And if we fall short, at least might get some of it. So you might get somebody who is hopeful, optimistic, resilient, but they may be lacking in terms of their ability to develop associates to become leaders. So something along those lines, future oriented and stuff like that. Look at this descriptor here. Authentic leaders, persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity in that they know who they are, what they believe and value, and they act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with each other. I mean, we have seen leaders fall short, and we know that this type of leadership is one that is, again, an aspiration rather than an actualization. But again, the theory is showing us an image of a leader that we would like to see, not necessarily one that we do get, that kind of thing like that. So that I like this model, but at the end of the day, for me, the problem that I have with this model is that it is so idealistic in nature that it creates a sadness for me that this is really one of the best leadership models that we can get to, but the reality is that I don't think we can ever find individuals to fit this model. Honestly, it's really innocent in its approach to looking at the world around us, um, especially given the nature of the leaders that already exist in the world around us. All right. So again, the followership rule is important. So again, it's pointing to the type of followers that are part of the organization and part of the how they bring the autistic leader and hold them in judgment of what's going on. All right. So again, transparent openness, guidance towards worthy objectives, and an emphasis on follow. So again, they're talking about these these characteristics that the leader should be showing, and it again, these are all great things to follow, but again, whether or not it's achievable is a different things. All right, so check this out. Authentic leaders do not fake their leadership. Relatedly, authentic leaders do not take on leadership roles or engage in leadership activities for status, honor, or other personal rewards. Authentic leaders are original, not copies. Authentic leaders are leaders whose actions are based upon their values and conviction. And that last one is actually quite true because, regardless, leaders' actions generally tend to indicate what their values and convictions are. So, again, an authentic leader in this case here will show the type of value structure that a person wants to has within them. So again, so there are a lot of descriptors that they're utilizing here. Um, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it goes on to describe this idealistic approach to inclusion, building the competencies and empowering followers, allowing for diverse points of view, allowing for collaborative approaches to decision making. Again, they're very idealistic in nature, but it can in fact be very problematic to try to utilize this model. So some subset of this has to be an approach that we can utilize in the real world around us, and that's what I'm hoping we will get to. Um, Now, there are lots, the chapter summary here. I don't need you to learn all these things, as I said before. What I really need you to do is to understand that leadership is a phenomenon that has been studied for a long time. And the approaches to all of the theories that were developed over the period were heavily impacted upon the governing thinking of the time frame. So we have to pay attention to what is the underpinning of our current environment because it will impact upon the behavioral types of activities and the theories that we're going to be looking at. Now, in the next chapter, we are going to be paying attention to uh, the the leadership, sorry, the relational leadership model. All right, so this summary just tells us all the things we've been looking at all the way through. Now, as I said it before, I don't need you to memorize any of this stuff. We're just trying to understand what went before, why they existed, how they came up, what context they were working in, and I hope you can see the relationship between what was taking place in the world at that point in time and the development of theory. So, as we can see, the chaos theory and the authentic leadership theory are responses to what people have been taking, what's been going on in life around us. Mahindra, you have a question you wanted to ask? See your mic open. Mahindra? All right. Anybody wanted to ask any questions as we've come to the end of tonight's presentation? Anything you wanted clarification on? Of the theories that we looked at, let me ask here now, which one appeals to you so far?
Probably the transactional or the transformational leader.
No, why?
The transformational leader because I like the idea of empowering your subordinates.
You're talking about there. Transformational is part of the servant leadership as well. But yes, I can see where you're getting at. But that empowerment, now, based upon where you are currently in your own personal development, one or number of the theories my my um my studies in leadership, the servant approach always appealed to me, um, because I always viewed that the function of a leader was to make sure that other people are prepared to take your job, so to speak. So you're kind of making yourself
Sorry, sir. I think you're cutting in and out a lot right now.
Okay, hold on. Let me try something and see if this helps. All right, is that helping? Okay, Mahindra said use. All right, is that better? There, guys.
I hope so.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. Can I ask where are you located, Mahindra? Not Mahindra. Hero.
What, like in Trinidad?
What part of Trinidad? Yeah.
I'm from South.
All right. Besides Andrew, who else has a preference for what leadership model is or theory that appeals to you?
The servant leadership.
Servant. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Justin. All right. Did you all get the whole thing about the cultural ideas of the time impacting upon the way in which leadership emerged, theory emerged period, the connection between the feelings of major thinkers in the time frame? You all seeing that connectivity?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s because I was alive during that. So the flower power, the Beatles, the British invasion as music stuff, and the hippie movement, all of that stuff influenced a lot of those impacted upon that whole. You know, it's another big thing during that period of time: drugs. A lot of LSD and people taking acid trips and smoking marijuana and getting high and basically getting in touch with yourself through
Hi, Paul.
through and some of the civil leadership theory and stuff. What kind of hairy fairy and nebulous kind of things, because they were they grew around that, especially when they started to experiment with mud pan and started to engage with
So sorry to
life
cut
there, and
you
in
off,
China
but
as well, the same thing.
you're breaking up a
Uh,
lot. So.
uh. Is anybody else experiencing that breakup?
Yes, yes, sir. You're
Yes,
breaking
sir.
up a lot.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
At present, yes.
Yes,
Look at
sir.
break up right
Is
now,
it up?
too, sir.
Right this second. Yes, still breaking up. I can't.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's still.
Yes, sir. It off and on,
Anyway,
it off and on.
yeah, I get that it's going to be that way. I actually people and talk to them about this because it's getting annoying. Um, all right, so I'll have to talk to the IP people here and see what I can do to strengthen my signal. All right, anyway, coming back to Marguerite. So everybody understands everything and they kind of follow the development of the ideas that we talked about, right? Yes?
Yes, sir. For the most part, yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Anybody has any questions or clarification that they're looking for in terms of the development of those theories?
No, sir.
Cool. I
No.
apologize for starting the recording. All right, good. All right, so I apologize for not starting the recording when I started the presentation. So I hope people who missed the class don't get too upset. All right, so let me stop the recording now.